Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. If we look at the moral theory of the Stoics very carefully, and in particular Epictetus Discourses, we see that although Stoicism is in certain respects very different than other paradigmatic examples of virtue ethics, it really is a type of virtue ethics. And one of the things that means is that it's not only attentive to, rules about things or individual cases. It looks at the human being in terms of their general sets of responses to things and evaluates those morally, not just how they behave in one given situation. Other types of ethics tend to focus a bit more on giving rules or guidelines for how to resolve particular cases. They place a great emphasis on being able to make decisions in particular situations. And they tend to be rather weak on this very important element, or rather dimension, of human moral existence, which is habit. Epictetus is going to tell us quite a bit about this in book 2, although there's going to be other instances in other books where he's going to bring it up as well. And you notice I've got this schema up here. The reason I put that up there is because what it illustrates for us is that, the faculty of choice, the proiresis, also translated as moral purpose, which is at the core of what a human being is according to the Stoic viewpoint. The faculty of choice is able to make choices which lead to actions. At the same time, what actually structures the fabric of the faculty of choice? How do we decide whether a person's faculty of choice is well ordered or oriented, or whether it's all screwed up? Well, a lot of that depends on habits, whether our habits are good habits or bad habits, what we call virtues and what we call vices. Not all habits, by the way, are necessarily going to be moral habits. As we're going to see, sometimes the action may bear upon, or the choice may bear upon another faculty, right? How we use, say, our faculty of music making, or to use another example Epictetus loves, our grammatical faculty, our linguistic faculties, we would say, right? We are able to direct all of these other faculties by using the faculty of choice. But they're also structured by habits, as we're going to see as we look at it. Now, when we engage in a choice, we often already feel ourselves steering towards one side or steering towards another side. And part of that is our inclinations that are, or our desires that, coming from things outside, saying, hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? We don't always have angels and devils on shoulders. We may have all sorts of other counselors and advisors. But we also tend to get steered by habits. So I'll use an example that Epictetus himself devotes quite a bit of attention to, and which I can speak from experience about: anger. Right? Anger from the Stoic perspective is always going to be a bad thing. And we can talk not only about the emotion of anger, but we can talk about something like a habit or a vice of anger. And there, the Greeks actually had a distinction. They would talk about, orge, anger, and then somebody being orgilos, being an angry person, an irascible person is how we translate it. Nowadays, we say somebody needs anger management. Usually we only do that if they've done something really bad and are court-ordered, because most people who are angry don't really want to admit it or recognize it. But when we get into a situation where there's a likelihood of us getting angry because we see somebody do something and we don't like it, and we feel that it's an insult to ourselves, and now our reasoning, is going into full gear, and we're thinking, that's SOB, I better do something to show him I'm not going to put up with that, and we start to get angrier and angrier. In a lot of cases, that's the habit that's doing the work there, and the habit is not, strictly speaking, making the choice for us. What it is doing is making the choice a tougher one for us. Or rather, it's making it an easy choice to choose the bad thing. It's making it a harder choice. We have to exert more effort to do the right thing. And Epictetus would say, look, it's still within our realm of responsibility. And we are also responsible for our habits once we become aware of them. And by the way, once we become aware of our habits as important in moral life, it's usually because we're partly screwed up with respect to them. So we have some work to do. Now, when we make a choice, we can either strengthen the habit or reinforcing it, making it more and more part of who we are, or we can weaken it. And eventually, we can replace certain habits with other habits. One of the teachers of Epictetus is a great example of this. Polemo was sometimes criticized because he was a guy who, when he was young, apparently he liked to drink a lot and chase women. And then he eventually trained himself to be a different kind of guy. And everyone said, oh, it's such a continent, such a temperate guy. And Polemo would say, well, yeah, you know me now, but that's because I had to struggle against these habits and overcome them. So, what does Epictetus tell us specifically? There's two portions of the text where he goes into this quite a bit. In chapter 9 of book 2, he says that actions strengthen or destroy particular faculties in a person. So, if you want to be a good musician, you actually need to do some practicing. This is something that anybody who's ever tried learning an instrument knows quite well. You can't just get yourself in front of a drum kit or pick up a clarinet or pick up a guitar and start, playing Smoke on the Water or whatever you want. Although Smoke on the Water is pretty easy, that's why most people learn it right away. You have to practice. You have to put the time and the work in. Likewise, in order to learn how to speak well, that takes some practice. Even be able to use the language so as to write effectively, grammar, right? This is what they're calling it here. That requires a habit. That's a faculty, that's a power of the human being that has to be developed. You want to learn how to become a farmer? There's a lot of things you actually need to learn, like pulling weeds. Pulling weeds sounds really easy. Get yourself out there and start doing it for a couple hours and take a look at what your patch looks like and what the patch of somebody who actually knows what they're doing looks like. You see all these little weed tops still sticking out because you didn't get down in there and pull with the right amount of pressure and figure out what kind of plant you're working with. Well, that's a matter of not having certain habits, right? So actions are going to strengthen or destroy particular faculties in a person. These include the moral faculty, the faculty of choice. This includes our faculty of reason, which is really the same thing. If we don't use it rightly, we're going to screw it up. And there isn't a single part of us that can't get screwed up by misuse. So this is why he says the philosophers tell us we don't just need learning, mathesis, or mathein, it's the verb there, but also practice, melete, literally paying attention to what you're doing. You practice by doing something in a deliberate way over and over again. And discipline. The Greek word for that is ascesis, the word that we get ascetic from. This will often involve making choices that deprive you of something that you kind of want at the time, right? So if you want to be a great athlete, boy, you have to cut out a lot of things from your life. You can't be out there partying all the time. This is how a lot of good athletes become bad athletes, right? If you want to become a great musician, when all the groupies are coming backstage, you probably need to say, I really need to spend a little bit of time practicing. Sorry, can't hang out with you past 10 o'clock, or something along those lines. I don't really know about that because I'm not in the music industry, but I imagine it would be like that. Now, those are important things to keep in mind. In 2:18, he tells us very explicitly, it's not just the disciplines that are strengthened by actions. It is the habits themselves that are generated or destroyed by actions. And these have consequences beyond the situation. I think that a lot of people don't realize, in part because it's more convenient not to realize this, that when we're making a choice, we're not just making a choice for right now. We're not just making a choice in this particular situation where we have responsibility just for how we're acting at that point. We're making a choice that incorporates the past. That's part of what the aspect of habit is, the past coming into the present. And we're making a choice for the future, the kinds of persons we're going to be. Whether it's going to be easier or harder for us to do the right thing or to do the wrong thing the next time that we're in a similar situation. And so Epictetus is going to tell us that we're actually worse off after we give in to our desires for bad things, for things that are actually not good for us, or give in to what he calls appearances, right? Appearances that get in our way. So he says, in this way, without a doubt, the infirmities of our mind and character spring up. Once you conceive a desire for money, if reason be applied to bring you to a realization of the evil, if you can get a good glimpse on what's going on there, both the passion is stilled and your governing principle is restored to its original authority. But if you don't apply a remedy, your governing principle does not revert to its previous condition. The faculty of choice, the proairesis, the governing principle, is not in a completely neutral state. It's getting better or it's getting worse as a whole, and the whole person is oriented around this. So the person is becoming better or worse. So he says, on being aroused again by the corresponding external impressions, it bursts into the flame of desire more quickly than it did before. If this happens over and over again, the next stage is that a kind of callousness results, and the infirmity strengthens the avarice, the greed. A greedy person becomes, in a certain way, blind to the effects of what is happening to them. Likewise, he talks about anger. He says, certain imprints and wheels are left behind on the mind, and unless a man erases them perfectly, the next time he's scourged upon the old scars, he has wheels no longer but wounds. So if, therefore, you wish not to be hot-tempered, do not feed your habit. Set before it nothing on which it can grow. Very tough to do. Trust me on that, because I've been trying to put this into effect. Don't allow that habit to begin to be active once it's already established. Don't feed it. Don't give it sustenance. Instead, pay attention to something else. He says, at the first step, keep quiet and count the days on which you have not been angry. I used to be angry every day, after that every other day, then every third, and then every fourth day. If you go as much as 30 days without a fit of anger, sacrifice to God. For the habit is at first weakened and then utterly destroyed. This is what we can say about every single habit that either stands in our way or helps us along. We don't just want to get rid of bad habits, by the way. We want to produce good habits so that it becomes easier and easier and easier for us to choose what is genuinely good for us and genuinely good for the rest of the world.